I'm Bekboum Pyun from Line Platform Engineering Team 3. I'm going to present on the Passwordless LINE project aimed at replacing password with biometric information for a safe login. The session will start with an introduction to the history of passwords, then move on to the pros and cons of using biometric information, which are used as substitute information, the overall industry trend, and an introduction to the Passwordless LINE project. Actually, the history of password dates back to 2,000 years ago. It was used by the ancient Roman military to distinguish the enemies from the allies. They created words only their allies would understand. It is surprising that to this day, the military soldiers use this type of secret words to identify their allies. The more modern concept of the secret word, the password, was introduced in the 1960s, starting with the Unix system, which needed to share resources. The pros of this form of password is that it is easy to implement, no dedicated devices required for its implementation, and the users are quite familiar with how to use it. But the downside is that there is no relationship between the owner and the password. So when the password is leaked, the new owner of the password is granted all the permissions that the previous owner had. And of course, there is the issue that you can easily forget your password. Besides that, there are people with bad intentions who use these weaknesses in passwords, and as you can see on the screen, they create pinholes that look like power sockets in ATMs or ticketing machines at train stations in attempts to steal the passwords entered by the users. And these cases continue to exist. Therefore, a password has changed from something you know to something you have or something you are. And following this trend, biometric authentication is used as a substitute for passwords. Of course, to make biometric authentication possible, we need advancements in sensors and other devices, and currently, many smartphones have these devices installed, and it is true that biometric authentication has been made possible in part due to this fact. Intuitive interface that is easy to use, the fact that it doesn't have to be memorized or carried around, and no possibility of loss. These are some of the advantages of biometric authentication, and also the fact that it is nearly impossible to copy or steal. The level of security is also quite high. The probability of hitting a 4-digit code randomly and getting the right code is 1 in 10,000. If we call this phenomenon FAR, a false accept ratio, the FAR of a fingerprint is 1 in 50,000. And the FAR of iris has a higher level of sophistication at 1 in 1 million and up to 1 in 2 million. Accordingly, the industry is showing clear signs of moving towards actively using biometric authentication. Actually, if we take a closer look, rather than using biometric information, providing the option to disable passwords is actually another key factor. In cases of Yahoo Japan, eBay, Docomo, and Microsoft, while allowing users to use biometric information, they also allow the users to disable their passwords at the same time. The general trend in the industry is removing the flow of using passwords entirely. And in case of Microsoft, which suffered many attacks and attempts to steal password, it is actively researching passwordless input flow and is often the first to try out new things in the trend. As a platform hosting many users, Line is no exception. There are approximately 10,000 attempts per day made to steal passwords through random assignments, and each time these attempts are made, we use various measures and block these attempts. The users are notified of such attempts, but we found out that fear is created in the users just by knowing that such an attempt was made. That is why we came to look for a fundamental measure for a solution. So the Passwordless LINE project, which will be installed starting in Line 10.18.0, has 3 key highlights. First is the use of biometric information, and as mentioned earlier, the disabling of password. And second, primary as a key, which we call PAAK, which allows the users to use their smartphone like a master key. So when they are logging in using a secondary device such as a desktop or an iPad, the user can safely log in through their smartphone using biometric authentication. And there is a pairing process at first between the user's main device, such as a smartphone, and their secondary device, such as a desktop. Previously, perhaps only a push notification was sent to the user's smartphone. But now, the user has to be more actively involved in the pairing process. We designed the system in this way to prevent a scenario where a user might authenticate a notification from an abuser giving them permission. This could be said to be another key highlight. Now, I'm going to talk about the flow of the Passwordless LINE project. First, registration. Face or fingerprint can be registered for iPhone, and for Android phones, a user can register the biometric information supported by their device, and some Android devices also support the screen unlock method as an alternative. Once the user has completed the registration of biometric information, we provide the disable password feature as an optional feature, and we inform the users that turning off this feature will enhance their level of security through a notice. Device pairing is required only at the very first time, but as I have said while mentioning the highlights, device pairing is not done with a push notification sent to the main device. What happens is that a guide message is displayed on the screen of the secondary device asking the users to put in a PIN code into their main device. The user will have to put in the verification code following the guide message displayed on the screen of the secondary device. Afterwards, the PAA function of the passwordless line uses phone number as the main key, so when a phone number is entered, the biometric information has to be entered in the mobile phone that is registered as a secondary device's identifier. And when biometric authentication process is completed using the main device, login is completed in this secondary device. So it consists of these steps. In carrying out this project, we focused on two things. First, we were motivated because we wanted to get rid of the instances where the users would have to receive a notification informing them about an attack from an abuser. And that is why when the smartphone and the secondary device is paired for the first time, the user will have to get actively involved, putting in the PIN code to prevent a situation where a user enters a PIN code without knowing that the request came from an abuser or an attacker. We also wanted to restrict the flow where a password is used. That is why we designed the system so that on secondary devices such as a desktop or an iPad, PAAK login method using the phone number of a smartphone is first displayed. If users want to use the email password, users will have to go through two steps, and if they want to use another method for login, it's only one step with a QR code, so one step for QR code and PAAK login, whereas it takes two steps to log in using an email password. That's all I have prepared for this session. Thank you very much for listening.